ready? My name is, I welcome everybody. My name is Edwin Konazarkin. As a physician, I'm very honored to welcome everyone tonight to our panel discussion about organ donation. Sephardic Heritage Alliance, Inc., SHAI, has always been in the forefront of issues relating to our community. And as Vice President of SHAI, I'm very proud of SHAI's board who agreed to create tonight's panel, which at times could be controversial. As such, when our board member, Sean Sharoch Esharov, brought this topic to us, he had the full backing of the board, and we thank Sean for spearheading this topic and bringing it to our attention. Also, as an executive board member of Sephardic American Medical Society, SAMS, I would like to thank SAMS and the rest of the executive board for co-sponsoring this event. Our two presidents are actually here. SAMS, based here in Great Neck, is a society founded in 2003 by Physicians for All Medical Professionals, promoting health awareness, and advances in medicine. Next, I'd like to thank the Great Neck Chinese Association for promoting this event and being in attendance. Next, I'd like to thank our host, Temple Israel of Great Neck, and Rabbi Howard Stecker for graciously hosting and co-sponsoring this event. Most of all, I would like to thank all our esteemed panelists for joining us tonight, including our new addition, Rabbi Steve Moskowitz, who has donated an organ himself, to discuss this vital topic that touches many lives in our community. Each panelist has prepared remarks, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer for the audience. Please help me in welcoming and thanking our organizer, Sean Sharoch Esharov, for raising this issue and sitting here.
Hello everyone, my name is Sharoch Esharov and I'm a member of SHAI's board. I would like to thank you for coming here tonight to support and to be informed about organ donation. I would also like to thank the members of the SHAI board for supporting this forum as soon as they suggested the idea. The subject matter of our forum is very important, and the last year it has become near and dear to me. I found out I was diabetic when I was a teen. As time passed, my blood work results showed a deterioration of my kidneys. A couple of years ago, the news got worse when I was told that my kidney function had gone down to 30%. I came to find out later that when kidney function is below 20%, you can choose to sign up for a kidney transplant. At the time, I didn't want to hear about it or deal with it. By July of last year, the situation had become dire. And I was told I have kidney failure, and that my two kidneys were functioning at below 5%. A while later, I read a note from one of my doctors to another, which stated that there was a high risk of death. While all of this was going on, I was in the process of going through a self-improvement program called Synergy Education. I did a lot of growing up, some soul searching, some crying, and I realized that my life does not have to be over. On July 7th, I went into the hospital for emergency dialysis, and after 4 days, left with a catheter in my chest and a fistula in my left wrist. It took a full 5 months to be able to remove the catheter, which was a relief as it finally enabled me to take a shower instead of sponge baths, something that I will never take for granted again. I now go to dialysis 3 times a week, and I'm on a machine for 3.5 hours each time. Soon after all this, I started the process of getting on kidney transplant lists in different states. Each state has its own process. At this time, I'm signed up on this in North Shore LIJ, which has an 8 to 10 year wait. At St. Barnabas Hospital in New Jersey, which has a 5 to 7 year wait. And Penn Medicine in Pennsylvania, which has a 4 to 6 year wait. I have also completed the process at Emory in Atlanta and in Florida, which has the shortest wait time of 3 to 5 years. At every visit, I have been reminded by each doctor I saw that if I can find a living donor, it would be the fastest way to get on top of the list for a kidney. At this prompted me and SHAI to initiate this forum. Tonight we have put together a number of experts who have significant knowledge and personal experience about the different aspects of organ donation. In doing so, we will address the importance of organ donations in transportation, put to rest some of the myths about the issue, and answer any other questions that may arise. We have a knowledgeable and successful transplant surgeon, Dr. Aaron Winnick, who received his medical degree from UMDNJ and SUNY Downstate, and further completed a fellowship in abdominal transplantation at NYU Langone. He currently practices at Northwell Health. Rabbi Stecker, of course, is a senior rabbi here at Temple Israel. He graduated from Columbia University and was ordained from the Jewish Theological Seminary and is an officer of the New York Board of Rabbis. Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz has been an instructor in Yeshiva Day School for more than 25 years. 13 years ago, Rabbi joined the rank of the best team in the planet when he became an altruistic kidney donor to help a complete stranger, a Jewish woman who had placed an ad in the newspaper. Since then, he has been actively involved in consulting and promoting organ donation. And last but certainly not least, Rebecca Clark, who graduated from Binghamton University in 2017 and currently reports for Blank State Media. She has a unique story about her experience with kidney transplants donation, which we will hear from her shortly. So without further ado, I would like to ask Rabbi Stecker to start the discussion.
Sharuch, I want to thank you for convening us and for introducing this program. I am very grateful for the leadership of SHAI, for the leadership of Sephardic American Medical Society, to my co-panelists as well. And I'm going to jump in by saying that what I'm about to provide is an overview of how this whole question of the donating of organs, of transplantation, is understood in Jewish tradition. I will say at the outset that what I am about to provide is not a substitute for consulting with your rabbi, whether that would be me as a rabbinic authority or some other rabbi, regarding any particular issue that might arise, because Jewish tradition is very clear that while we establish certain principles that are general principles, we also take into consideration the particular details that pertain to each and every situation. So the question that we're going to consider in the next few minutes is, first of all, is it permissible for someone to donate his or her organs, either to declare that the person wishes to be an organ donor, so that upon a person's demise, the organs might be removed from that person's body in order to have a life-sustaining impact on another person? Is it permissible for members of a family, for people who are entrusted to make decisions for somebody, to make the decision to have the person's organs donated upon that person's demise? So that would be the first question. And the second question that scholars have actually asked is, as a follow-up, if it is permitted, might it in fact also be required, given the incredible emphasis that Jewish tradition places on saving human lives? So the first question, is it permitted? The second question, might it in fact be required? So I'm going to just briefly deal with the first and then the second. Is it permitted to donate one's organs, to declare oneself an organ donor, or to declare that one's loved ones should be organ donors upon their death? So Jewish tradition recognizes two concepts. The first concept that we recognize is that saving a life is a remarkable principle. In fact, the rabbi said, "Pikuach nefesh doche et hakol," saving a life actually overrides other important principles. For example, we know that circumcising a child is a basic mitzvah on the 8th day of a boy's life. The boy is circumcised. But if the child suffers from a disorder that might make circumcision dangerous or life-threatening, then circumcision actually does not have to be done. Maimonides speaks about this in great detail. What are the circumstances that would override the mitzvah of circumcision? And that is true of Shabbat observance, which may be violated if a life is at stake. So it's an incredibly important principle. You have it over here on the one hand, and on the other hand, you might be aware that there are also principles that have to do with what is known as kavod hamet. When somebody dies, the body is supposed to be treated with kavod. The body is supposed to be treated with dignity. And so there are prohibitions against disgracing a dead body through disfigurement, known in halachic parlance as nivul hamet. There are prohibitions against deriving benefit from a body, hana'ah min hamet. And there's also a prohibition, as we might well be familiar, in delaying burial, which is known as halanat hamet. So you are not supposed to disfigure, you are not supposed to derive benefit, and you are not supposed to delay burial. However, saving a life, the possibility that a person's organs, if removed shortly after death, and I'll say a word about that later, might actually allow someone to enjoy an enhanced life, or might even allow them to live altogether. That, according to many authorities, actually overrides the concern against all of the issues that pertain to kavod hamet, to the dignity of a body. Rabbi Unterman, former Israeli chief rabbi, wrote that it is permitted to remove tissue from someone once the person dies because of pikuach nefesh, and that actually overrides all of the other considerations that were mentioned. So that is a basic introduction to the fact that it is to be permitted. And by the way, I just want to add before I go on to whether or not it can be considered required for each of us to declare ourselves as potential organ donors, I just want to say one more thing, which is that going back centuries, Jews have regarded it as an imperative for each of us to go out of our way to help someone when it comes to a life-threatening circumstance. So Maimonides commented on the verse in the Torah, Lo tamol lo tamreacha, you should not stand idly by the blood of your fellow. He said it's not just a question of you shouldn't stand by while something is happening to another person, but you should actually go out of your way, al kol tzedadin, to do anything that is within your power, shelo yovad tamreacha, so that nothing terrible should befall your neighbor. So he speaks of an imperative to do what we can, to be as proactive and as thorough as we can. So hence the permission. Now we go to the question of whether or not it is required. So the arguments against requiring it come from a few places. First of all, in order to require somebody to donate their own organs, to agree to donate, you have to fulfill the standard of what is known as cholet nimtza biyadenu. Literally means that the person who is sick needs to be right there. In other words, there has to be an immediate need. It has to be clear that the organ that will be given has a very high need and a very high likelihood of having a positive impact, of saving the other person's life. So that's the first concern. And the second concern has to do with how do you determine when a person has actually died? So that's a very important medical and ethical question, because the fear is that you might in fact be removing an organ before the person has actually died. So regarding the first, the reason why some scholars believe that you can in fact require someone to be an organ donor is because over time, from the 1950s when these conversations first occurred, and you'll hear more about that, until the present, transplantation has become so much more effective that there is a much higher guarantee that it will be successful. And so that concern is alleviated. And the second concern, determination of death, I'm not a physician, but there has been a growing consensus that that is ascertained by the permanent functional death at the center in the brain that controls breathing and other vital reflexes, meaning cessation of brain and brainstem activity. And with the growth of consensus around what constitutes death, it becomes more clear when, in fact, it is permissible to remove organs, and that, in turn, makes it easier to potentially require somebody to declare him or herself as an organ donor. So I want to just conclude by saying that you can require it of somebody in theory, but how can you truly require that? In a democracy where people have freedom over their own person, you cannot require somebody to sign an organ donor card. You cannot require a family to agree once a person has passed on that their organs be removed and donated for the purposes of saving another life. What Rabbi Unterman said almost half a century ago, I think the Hebrew that he uses is beautiful. I'm going to share it and then I will translate. He says that what we should do is lahashpia al hakrovim u'lishalvam sheyaskimu, to try to influence people and to try to convince them that this is something that should be done. And it's very emotional, as we will hear. But one thing which has been determined, not universally, but determined as a trend, is that families who are grieving discover that if, in fact, their loved one is able to help someone else to survive by virtue of donating their loved one's organs, that it actually helps to give meaning to that person's life and can actually help with the emotional grieving process. So even though in that moment, as you can well imagine, it's very emotional and very difficult for the family, families who have agreed, even in the moment, even without having determined that ahead of time, have discovered that they feel a very good sense that the person whom they loved has now been able to pass on life to somebody else. And finally, what Rabbi Unterman says is Zechut Gedolah lo. It is actually a great merit for a person who determines that he or she will be a donor, v'korat ruach l'nishmato, and it is gratifying to the person's soul, shenaseh mitzvah gedolah kazo begufo ve'en lezalzel b'cheshbon kazeh, that so great a mitzvah can be fulfilled with that person's body. And he said, do not underestimate that. Do not underestimate the incredible impact that it can have on a person's soul to actually make this determination. So is it permissible? There is wide recognition that in fact it is, that it overrides concern with the body once the person has passed on. Is it required? Actually, a growing number of rabbinic authorities are saying that it should be considered not just mutar, not just permitted, but also mitzvah, also one of the highest mitzvot, the highest commandments that a person can perform. So thank you for listening to the overview, and we shall continue.
Thank you again. I'd like to call our next rabbi who both has religious point of view and the personal experience of donating.
Thank you very much. Forgive my voice right now, it's being forced. So, in terms of the permissibility of organization, I won't even address the issue because Rabbi Stecker did it very competently. The issue of Pikuach Nefesh really supersedes all other issues, and therefore there are no halachic issues. And if you look on the Hod's website, which I'm very familiar with because I was in yeshiva with Rabbi Berman when he was talking about doing it,
So we were there together, we've been in touch ever since, and many Orthodox rabbis are themselves organ donors, etc., so it's beyond the shadow of any doubt in terms of its permissibility. I'll share with you what happened to me when I donated, and I'll try to keep it brief, and although I have to leave, my email will be held if anybody wants to discuss it, and the goal is, the bottom line is that other than just, thank you, just talking about it in terms of its academic value, theoretical value, it's something that people should consider. So, and I would say to you before I would start, it's something that I would do again. It's something, although I've been advised not to, I should keep quiet. It's something that I would have any one of my 4 children do. And I'd be very proud to see that happen. I would not, without hesitation. So, it's briefly, one Friday night I was sitting at home reading a newspaper, well, not a newspaper, but the Jewish press, and I was flipping through the pictures, whatever, the ads, and I saw this ad for that there was a woman, mother of 3 children, who needed a kidney. So I looked at my wife, who's a nurse, and I said, like, what would you think, if I volunteered to do this? She said, like, it's a needle in a haystack, Steve, I'm not gonna get picked. I said, I know, but would you mind? She said, okay, it's a theoretical conversation, but sure, go ahead, if it's, whatever. So I signed up and whatever. The next week, I saw another ad in the same paper for a different person. So I called up again and I said, listen, if you're already gonna arrange for my, blood to be tested, check on both of them. She's like, why are you obsessed with this? I said, I'm not obsessed, but if I'm already going through this process, maybe it should go, if I don't match this one, maybe that one. So oddly enough, I matched both. So that was very, very odd. I wasn't expecting it. So I was called into this meeting with Pat McDonough and Montefiore. And they said, okay, well, you have to decide who you want to give it to. So I said, how do I know? I said, just pick one, doesn't make a difference. So she said, well, we're not allowed to say that to you. It's an ethical conflict. We can't tell you who to donate it to. So I said, well, who's sicker? So they said, one of them has had 7 relatives step forward and we can't find a match and we're really worried about her. That began a relationship with me and a Hasidic woman whose husband is a Hasidic Rav, and I'm like, apparently I'm now blood related to a lot of Eastern Europe, but I wasn't before. And my mother-in-law said, like, what makes you think that this Hasidic woman's gonna take your Yeshiva University kidney? So they got over it. So I matched, and it was it's just a real thing. I'm a modern Orthodox, but Orthodox rabbi. And when we met there, when I met her and her husband, it was pretty clear that we don't shop at the same stores. And we had this amazing conversation, a lot about Torah learning, this and that. And we were asking about the surgery, if it could be delayed past sunrise so I could put on tefillin and daven in the morning. And like, no, we're not going to delay the surgery. You're going to have to be here at 5 in the morning and do your thing, whatever. So I was there, laying these straps, and people thought I was trying to hang myself, whatever I was doing. So early in the morning, and I went through the surgery. My family was for the most part supportive. I only really was concerned with my wife and my mother. And my mother was, to say the least, not so happy about it. She was much happier when she met the mother of the recipient afterwards. And my wife said, just try to be home for Shabbos. I'll be with the kids. Don't leave me alone here with 4 children by myself. So we're having gone through the whole thing, and we'll talk about it at the time if you ever want to hear more about that, etc. It was fascinating, just the process of becoming qualified for it. I had, lied to a lot of people in the hospital, because apparently in Montefiore, so many of my former students from Great Neck, I worked in North Shore Academy 15 years, were medical students. And they kept asking if I was fine. I said, yeah, I'm visiting somebody, etc. So I hadn't lied that much my whole life. So just to see, it's almost messianic to see what medical science, that we live in today's day and age and what we're able to accomplish. It's spectacular, it's amazing. So to see this going on, and I actually saw my body producing urine on different screens, what I was learning about myself, both in terms of the biological side of me and the spiritual side and the psychological side. It was really very, very, very amazing, including even the recovery, which was quite humbling, because I'm a very, very physically active and Baruch Hashem healthy person. It was weird for me when I was convalescing in the hospital. So I had, as we're sure you hear about the kind of surgery that you have, they just make a small incision, etc. Well, 5 of them actually. She was open stem to sternum. She came to visit me because she felt so much better the very next day. this kidney that I gave her began to work on the table in that minute, which means that if only we would do what we're supposed to do, whatever we're supposed to do, but this kidney has a job in this world, and it was taken out of me and put into her and began working immediately. So she actually felt better than I did, because I was healthy as a horse and knocked on my back, and she felt sick with all these toxins in her body for so long. She came to visit me, and since then we've been friends. She calls and sends flowers to me on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and on Hanukkah. Aleph Hanukkah was when it happened. So we're very, very close. I stopped going to the weddings because it was like me in 2000. Because her uncle's the grand poobah. It's like a big deal, you know. So he came in from Canada, and I was on the dais with a bunch of people. Only person there not wearing a hat, and it was really fascinating. A lot of interesting experiences came out of this. If half of what this woman wishes on me comes true, then I've already won lotto. It just hasn't been revealed yet. So they're very, very grateful. In fact, you know, her daughter called me after one of the weddings that I did not attend, and she thanked me for the gift that I sent. And I looked, I was like, Dina, what did you get? She's like, I didn't send anything. So I don't know what the heck she's talking about. So I said, I'm really sorry. What did we get you? So this is her daughter. She's my mother.
Oh.
It just like totally went over my head. So I was like totally not picking up on the signal. So it was a fascinating thing, and I really learned a great deal. A couple of odd tidbits that came out. One of my concerns was, what's going to happen with life insurance? Something happens to me. So I came back select preferred with one kidney tied behind my back. And I said, what if I want to renew? They said, well, for you to qualify to give a kidney, you are scrutinized so carefully that you're in the best category, because they won't let you give a kidney unless a separate team of doctors will evaluate you to make sure that you're healthy enough to do so. So therefore, that was totally delayed. My brother asked me, he said to me, like, you know, like, what if one of your kids would need a kidney? So I said, I know that you would step up and give him one of yours. So he said, I know, but what are you putting me in that position for? So, that kind of passed also. It happens to be that the family donors, you can learn more about this, the families of donors are put to the front of the line, so to speak, etc. But it was definitely a life-altering experience. I speak to people all the time about it, not just in terms of groups and general knowledge, and students of yeshiva who are studying medical science, OIU, this and that, but also the people that are really considering and want to find out what it's actually like and what you have to go through, and what's it like to get back to work, etc. I was back up. Just to be honest, some people say they were back at work and they were back up on their feet or were home in a couple of days. I had surgery on Wednesday. I was offered to go home before Shabbat, and I pictured my kids jumping into bed with me, and I stayed put until Sunday. And then I slept until they went back to school with them. So, but 2 weeks later, I was back teaching. 4 weeks at post, I was running up the stairs to the Mill Shiva Academy, young block here. So if I didn't have a memory of it, I wouldn't even know. There is nothing that I am restricted from doing physically. They would give me a whole list of things, and I was like, listen, it's a very short list to me. It's like, I have to eat chillin', drink Diet Coke, and ski. Those are my big three that I really don't want to give up. And they said, you're fine. I can't, the modeling career is over. I have a couple of small scars, and no boxing, professional football. So they're off the table now also. It really is a phenomenal thing. And I think I'm just about out of time. But I'll tell you that I got a call a couple months later, and this guy named David Weiss called me and said to me, I'm going through this. I said, listen, I want to. He said, no, I'm already giving kidney. So I said, why are you calling? He goes, I just wanted to let you know, I thought you'd find it interesting. I said, why? He goes, remember the woman who you didn't give it to? I'm giving it to her. It was 5 months later. So I went to the hospital to visit him. I never met him before. And he said to me, she was like, well, how do you know who he is? I said, when I see this guy, I'm going to know. So that's ridiculous. Of course, I came upstairs. I saw a guy with a velvet yarmulke and Nike pole walking like Tim Conway, and that's him. That's my boy. So we had a long conversation, and I asked him, I was like, why did you give, etc. He had a sibling who had a limb blown off in a pigua in a terrorist attack, and said when he survived, I have to give back one life for the one that I said, that's a much better reason than I have. I just thought it was an amazing thing to do. I spent a lot of time working with students, and it takes a lot of years to make a match. But here, in one day, I saved someone's life. That doesn't happen that often. So that for me, that was an amazing thing. So I said, how'd your family feel about it? He goes, well, I have like 15 siblings. I was like, what? 15 siblings? The whole conversation shifted, and I asked, like, how many? Forget about the kid. I did that already, but it's like 15 siblings. So I said, like, how many grandchildren? He said, well, what time is it? So I said, as of yesterday, before Shabbos, Friday afternoon. He goes, as of yesterday, there were 101. And I was like, how? He goes, I have a website. Anyway, so I met a lot of interesting people that I've become friendly with through this whole experience. And I highly recommend it, and I'm available to talk to any of you who wish to pursue it further. Shakochachem to school mitzvot.
At this time, I would like to ask Dr. Levin to come up and have his presentation.
First, I want to apologize. We have some technical difficulties, so I'm going to improvise a little here. Hopefully, everybody can see. Just to give a little background, that's not shown. Can you see that?
Do you want us to turn off the lights?
Kind of, sort of.
Turn off the lights?
If we could dim the lights or shut them off, that may project a little better. So, my name is Aaron Winnick. I'm a transplant surgeon here at North Baltimore. Sorry, I'm not good with mics. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm Sephardic, I'm Orthodox, and I went to yeshiva my whole life, and I was always told straight out, you can't do donation for various reasons that were already mentioned. But the gist of it came down to, are you allowed to put yourself at risk? Are you allowed to basically desecrate a dead body in order to help somebody else? And I remember the exact day I went to Brandeis University, and the year before I went there, I was a senior in high school, Elisa Flato was the first American casualty in Israel from a suicide bomber. And her family donated, I believe, 7 organs, if I'm not mistaken. And that was after meeting with Rav Moshe Feinstein and all the, forgive me, I don't know the names, of all the authorities at the time. And they decided that they can use it. The argument came up, do they have to be given only to Jewish people or to Israelis? And the answer was no, because I believe 2 Palestinians were also saved from her organs. So that opened, from a secular standpoint, that opened the debate into the Jewish world about allowing organ donation. These days it's a completely different world. One, because technology is very different, what we offer is very different, and what we know is very different. How much time do I have? You said about 10 minutes?
That's fine, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to touch on a few things. This is a very complicated area where we could talk for literally hours about certain things. The reason the field has changed so much is because of innovation. And innovation means different things to different people. This is one of my favorite quotes. If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. It's attributed to different people, Einstein, Twain, and Henry Ford. They don't know who said it, but when it comes to surgery, when it comes to medicine, this is very apropos, because if we keep doing what we always did in the past, we wouldn't make any progress. And the progress has been they've made today with transplant is specifically because we don't have enough organs. And that's the biggest problem facing us today, is we have so many more people that need organs than we have organs to offer. Organ donation, very simply, you're taking one organ from one person, putting it into somebody else. We can transplant many different organs. Most commonly are solid organs in the body: heart, intestine, kidney, liver, lungs, and pancreas. Then you could also do cornea, which is a different field, because you could do that without with less restraints with the body, and then also hearts of different organs. You could do heart valves and stuff like that. This is the crucial issue right here. Types of donors that you're dealing with: deceased donor and living donor. There are 2 types of each. Living donor is easy. You can have someone that's related to you, someone that's not related to you. Either way, every please correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi, almost every authority, halakhic authority, will claim that you can donate from a living person to a living person under any circumstance, as long as the appropriate precautions are taken, that you're not putting yourself at too much risk. Now, as long as you're not taking too much risk and putting someone's life in excessive danger. So for a kidney transplant, for a kidney donor, it's evolved to the point where it's now being done with a single incision that's about 3 inches, depending on the size of the kidney. The whole restriction is pulling the kidney out of the body, so it has to be a few inches just to do that. So single incision for the donor. Surgery takes about 3 hours, and most people are in the hospital about 2 days, 2 to 3 days. It's more and more common to do this. We do it I don't, but the surgery is done all the time for kidney cancer if you're doing a nephrectomy. So this is essentially the same thing, except the kidney's healthy. The transplant process itself, to put the kidney in, is a lot less involved in the sense that the patient doesn't feel it as much. As was mentioned earlier, the recipient went to the donor, and that's because that person is on steroids, they're on medication that make it less painful, and they're feeling better because they have a functional organ. So it makes it easier for them to move around and to function. What happens with the recipient varies. Usually they're in the hospital for about 4 or 5 days. For a living donor transplant, the results are across the board 100% better than deceased donor. And that is simply because you control it. You're taking it out and putting it in within a couple of hours, as opposed to up to 24 hours sometimes. So the kidney, we're talking about kidney, works better. For liver, people could donate half the liver also. And more involved surgery, it's not done laparoscopic, you're in the hospital longer, but the function is just as good, and people survive and they live, and the benefit for the liver is that it grows back, so you don't have to worry about only having one kidney and the risk of having something else. I'm going to go into that a little bit more. The deceased donor this is where the problem is from a Judaic standpoint, because there are 2 types of death that we consider. Most commonly, it's brain dead. 90% of patients that go for donation, 85 to 90%, are brain dead. And that's based on physical exams, certain tests that basically show that there's no brain function. The heart is still beating. The other one is called cardiac death, or circulatory death, where the heart stops. And then you're rushing to basically get the organs in a timely manner so that they can still be used. For the cardiac death, most people will agree the patient's already dead, the heart stopped. It's less of an ethical dilemma, less of a religious dilemma, less of a halakhic dilemma. The brain death is the issue, and that's because, is that really death? Now, I'm not going to go into the whole ethics of it, but this is where a lot of the halakhic authorities will differ as to whether or not it's allowed. And that was always the debate in the past is, can you take somebody that's brain dead? Transplants have been going on from the 1950s. 1954 was the first successful kidney transplant between a set of twins in Harvard. It worked because they were identical twins, so there were no antibodies. The body wasn't rejecting it. For the next 40 years, they were perfecting how to prevent rejection, and that's why so many transplants failed. It used to be when you were doing a kidney transplant, you put it in 25% of the time. Think about these numbers. 25% of the time, 1 in 4 survived. So you're doing a surgery where 3 people out of 4 died. Today, 1 year after a kidney transplant, 90% of people are alive. Okay? 1 month after a kidney transplant, I think it's 98% of people are alive. So the technology is better, the medicine is better, and what we offer is better. For the issue with the donation, and this is why we're here, we're going to talk about donation. The number one thing that we discuss is do no harm. You don't want to take somebody that is at risk for kidney problems and take out their 1 kidney so that they have a sick kidney remaining, or a kidney at risk of becoming sick. So everyone goes through a very rigorous screening process. Your family history is key. Anyone who has diabetes will not be a good candidate for donation. Anybody anybody who has certain medical diseases will not be a candidate for donation. These are some of the things listed here, if you could see. But essentially, no one would be even considered for it if there was a chance that you could go into kidney failure yourself. And that's something that I want to just stress very importantly, is that the donor is given priority. The donor is, first of all, we all have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody that steps forward to donate, whether it's a family member, whether it's altruistic, whether you're coerced, whatever the reason. You're not allowed to do that in the United States, by the way, so that was a joke. You're not allowed to take money for donating a kidney. You're not allowed to be forced into donating a kidney. You have to meet with social workers, you have to meet with nurses, you have to meet with pharmacists, you meet with everybody to make sure that the person that is donating it is in optimal condition and it's essentially safe. What does that mean for the donors? The latest data show that about 40 people out of every 10,000 that donate will develop kidney failure. So
Can you say
no-
that again?
nothing is risk-free. Every surgery has certain risks. The biggest thing that we worry about with the donor is not the immediate recovery. Everybody could have infection, everybody could have bleeding, everybody could have the complications that you get with any surgery. The biggest thing that we worry about is, will that donor themselves get kidney failure? And the numbers show that it is about 40 out of 10,000. So 4 in 1,000 will develop over the course of their lives kidney failure. I'll go into that a little more. I'm gonna cut out a lot of this stuff here. Just to touch on what I was saying before, after 5 years, 70% of people that got a kidney transplant are alive, 75% of people that get a heart transplant are alive, 73% of liver, and 54% of lung are alive at 5 years. Now, this is the key slide here. It could look better with the regular computer because I had graphics and everything, but we'll improvise. As of 5 p.m. today, 114,864 people in the United States are waiting for for an organ transplant, any organ. 75,000 are active on the waiting list. The discrepancy is because some people right now are just too sick to get the transplant today. So we have this certain criteria where they can put them on hold. They still stay on the list, but they basically will not get an organ if they're too sick for whatever reason. They do about 95 transplants a day in the United States for all organs, and we've had about 11,500 transplants so far and 5,500 donors this year alone. One donor can save 8 lives. 2 lungs, 2 kidneys, 1 heart, liver, intestine, and pancreas. Okay, that does not include cornea and skin, which are not considered life-saving, but they're more life-helping. This slide, if you can see it, again, I'm sorry about the poor projection here. This is the amount of people waiting for organs. These are the number of transplants performed. Huge gap in between. Okay, and this is going back 15 years. Over the past few years, you see that the number of donors have stayed the same. The number of people waiting has gone up. And the reason for that is multifactorial, but essentially because we're transplanting people that are older. It used to be you would never transplant somebody over 70. Then it was 75, then it was 80, now it's 85. And there are some people, depending on how healthy you are, even over 85, you could still transplant if they're in very good shape. So there really is no age cutoff for certain things. And it's also because we just have better ways of prolonging life and transplanting people who 5 years ago were deemed too sick for transplant, or 10 years ago were too sick for transplant. So the problem that we have is we have to try to find a way to minimize that gap. And there are 2 ways to do that. One is to increase the number of people donating when they die. One is by increasing the number of people donating when they're alive. That's why we're here today, to just give basic information. These can't see, so we won't go into that. Just something just to show, kidney is the most common organ. About 80% of people waiting for organs are waiting for kidneys. That's the big blue part. Liver is second with about 14,000, and then you get heart and lung. For transplants, for New York, it's the same pattern. New York is one of the worst states in the country for organ donation because of donors. We have the least amount of living donors compared to other places. Least amount of deceased donors compared to other places. Deceased is worse because it's a cultural thing.
Not healthy issues,
I'm sorry?
not being healthy.
They're turned away or they're not?
More
they're not even
consenting. People don't come forward for it. Living donor, actually, I have to rephrase that, I was mistaken. Living donor, we're actually equivocal with everybody else. For deceased donor, people that die, we are one of the worst in the country. And most of it's cultural. And it's because some of it's religious, some of it is other personal reasons. People don't like to donate. So there's this whole motion to try to improve that, to try to get more things out there. Let's get to the more important things here. When people say that they're going to multiple centers, so you're listed at multiple centers, which is great, we recommend that to everybody. The country, you can't see it well, but the country is broken down into 11 different regions. New York is its own region. So we're region number 9. We're the only one that's really just our own state. Everybody else is multiple states. South Carolina, Florida usually have the best results when it comes to waiting time. They have the least amount of waiting time, the most amount of organs. Can't tell you why. New York, California have the worst. So now, who can donate? Bottom line is, any person could donate to anybody else. And we used to say, and we still do say in some circumstances, that a relative is better. If you could get a kidney from a relative, it's better. When you look at the data that's just coming out over the past few months, in some circumstances that's true, in some circumstances that's not true. And what they're finding is, unless you're an identical twin, if you are not related to the person, the kidneys sometimes last longer, depending on why they were transplanted. So something that doesn't apply in this group, but if you are African American male donating, you have the highest risk of complications, both for the donor and the recipient. Okay, if you're an older white male, you're second. And then in between, women pretty much have the best results. So women donors typically have better results than the male donors. We don't really know why. It has to do with antibodies, it has to do with how the body's going to react to things, but it's generally pretty interesting how that happens. If you look at the types of donors that we have, the deceased donor, again, it's broken down into brain death and cardiac death. And this chart is basically just saying the green line is not showing up anymore. Reset it every time. Again, I do apologize. So this green line here is the number of brain death donors. This is the number of cardiac death donors. Okay, you're talking about 6,000 to 7,000 of one and 1,500 of another every year across the United States. So most of our donors are brain dead. 85 to 90% are brain dead. Halachically, again, if you have any consideration for this, if you're thinking about it, consult your rabbi. It is becoming more accepted to do it under certain circumstances. I do recoveries all the time where I'll go and I'll get the organs. It is a process that has been streamlined. It is done very respectfully for the body, for the family. We try to do it in haste so that the body can be buried first thing in the morning or whenever it needs to be. I'm sorry, are you asking a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is there a certain age a donor must be?
I can't hear you.
Is there a certain age a donor has to be?
A minimum age.
Minimum age 18.
The maximum?
And the maximum.
Maximum depends on the organ. I want to say offhand that there is no limit, although
There is.
there
I had an 80-year-old who donated a kidney.
I've taken 85 was my oldest. If it's functional, depending on who you're putting it into. There are some, and that's center dependent. There are some centers that would not do it for somebody over 80. Some, I know Columbia a while ago was looking at an 87-year-old as the organ is good, then you have to just select who you're putting it into. You're not going to put an 80-year-old kidney into a 20-year-old person because we know that's not going to last. Let's put it in a 40 or 50-year-old, 100%. I apologize, it's not working like I wanted to. So is there anything in particular that I could touch on for you guys that wasn't touched on already? Without doing a formal presentation like this, scrolling off my phone.
Why don't we save questions and answers to that?
Yeah.
And we just address the panel at that time. If that's okay. To give time.
Just one more thing, just one more thing, just to add. There are multiple organizations that are involved, government organizations. It's a whole umbrella group of this. The government, as we know, is not perfect. The organizations are not perfect. The process is not perfect. But we do try to improve on it. We do try to make it work, and we have made a lot of progress with it. So, from a medical standpoint, anything we do, it's basically with two objectives in mind. Priority, again, is always for the donor. We want to make sure that the donor is not harmed, that the donor is not put under an unnecessary procedure. Second thing is for the recipient. We want to make sure that the recipient, if you're going to go through all this, and there are risks of the surgery, there are risks of recovery, there are risks of rejection, and complications, that you want to make sure that whoever is going through it is appropriate. That being said, it's a process. You are not going to come out of here tonight and say, I want to donate, and then next week you're going to be on the surgery table having the surgery. It does not work like that. Okay, everything takes time. There's a whole interview process and screening process. So if you are interested, and I hope we'll get some more questions about that, then please do not hesitate to ask any questions, call, get involved, and we'll go from there.
Okay, we saved the best for last. Can I ask Rebecca to come up and tell us about her experience, please?
Hi. So, 3 months ago, about 3 months ago, I donated a kidney to my dad, and it was definitely for me a decision that at the time when I came forward seemed like the obvious choice, and even now looking back on it seems just as obvious to me, and I'm very happy with my decision and one that I would definitely make again. It's not one that definitely didn't go fast, and there's definitely a whole process that goes into it. It starts even before I came forward as a donor. For 2 years, my dad was on dialysis, and I didn't originally know when he got sick with kidney disease because I was studying abroad at the time. So I found out about 2 weeks after he had already been in the hospital. And it was a decision, it was a news that at the time seemed very out of nowhere, but I think if it was a stranger and you laid out all their medical history, it wouldn't really seem that strange, but when it's your own father, it just really hits you as they're actually that sick and they need a kidney. But it still didn't really, I didn't really grasp how sick he was until I was home. So I had come home for the summer, but then I went back up to school for my senior year, and then the whole time he was on dialysis. But then I came home and was sort of living at home while I was looking for jobs, and that's when I really realized just how sick he was and the toll that dialysis was taking on him, and emotionally and physically. So at the time he started going to different hospitals to try and get on their list because he had been waiting on Columbia for a while and it didn't necessarily seem like he was going to get one all too soon. So I traveled with him to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and sat in with him on different lectures and heard all about the process of donating, and repeatedly every doctor that they spoke with, the social workers, they kept saying that a living donor is a much better option. If you have a living donor that can come forward that will last 5 to 10 more years, it's more likely to take, it's just the better route. And I just kept telling my dad, like, it just makes more sense if I do this if I donate, and he was really uncomfortable with the idea from the start. But that afternoon, I kind of went around him a little bit at the Mayo Clinic, and while he was at his dialysis session there, got the initial blood test to see if I would be a match, and I found out that I was a perfect match a few weeks later. So I went forward with his permission, went forward to start getting tested at Columbia, the whole process is really strange and something that I don't think anyone really understands, even if, I don't think I did all the research that I needed to do beforehand, but even if you do, it's something that you don't really understand until you're going through it. But basically there's two separate teams. There's the recipient team and there's the donor team, so they try and keep everything separate to make sure that the donor is doing this at their own discretion and that you're not being coerced to do it or feel like you have to do it. But it's also very counterintuitive and sort of hypocritical, because you have all these doctors speaking to you saying this is an elective surgery, why would you want to do this, because they're only looking at it from you, you're healthy, why would you choose to take an organ out of your body and put yourself at a risk? You're not allowed to say, because I want to save my dad or I want to save whoever it is. So it's a very difficult process to go through. But eventually I was approved as a donor, and I think that going through the process of getting approved was the hardest part. The recovery for me wasn't that bad. I was in the hospital for about 2 or 3 days. The worst part was my sister was with me and she kept making me laugh, and that hurt a lot, but nothing else was that bad. I was back at work within about 2 weeks. I was back at the gym, probably could have gone back sooner than I did, but and I don't know, it's definitely not a perfect process, and I think that the emotional toll is the hardest even afterwards. My dad has had some complications and he's actually back in the hospital right now with the kidneys not rejecting, but it's an infection that they're trying to handle and deal with, but he should be fine. You definitely realize when you're going through the process all the hypothetical questions that I laughed at during it when they ask you, how would you feel if the kidney rejects or if it doesn't go through? And at the time you're like, I would feel fine because I did everything I could, but going through it now, I kind of do see how you do feel a little bit guilty, and even though you shouldn't. So I've read a lot of stories where donors say that they wouldn't tell other people to donate their kidney. I don't feel that way. I would advocate and tell everyone that if it's something that they feel strongly for, to do it. I think, overall my life really isn't that different than it was before.
I want to thank all of our speakers. They did a great job today, and I want to open up the venue for any questions that anyone may have at this time. Sir?
What is the success rate of second transplant for the kidneys?
What's the success rate of?
Success rate for the second transplant for the kidneys.
It depends. Get that microphone.
After a rejection.
After rejection.
Right, so are you talking about a second transplant, or are you talking about just if there's a complication?
First transplant failed, now you want to do the second.
It depends. So he's asking if your first transplant didn't work for whatever reason, and now you want to get a second transplant, what's the success rate? The answer is it depends on the reason. It depends on.
Work and fail.
Right, it depends on the reason for the initial kidney failure.
What are you talking about, different?
The reason for the initial kidney failure, was it diabetes, was it high blood pressure, was it some autoimmune process? That makes one difference, because if you're transplanted for diabetes, and you don't control your diabetes afterwards, that kidney is going to fail as well.
She's going to answer.
It's actually about my sister, who my other sister donated a kidney to her about 20 years ago, and it had worked perfectly, but now it's failing. All she has left is 10% of her kidney. So I am thinking of donating to her. I'm not thinking, but actually I'm going through the
go through the process.
I went through the process, and I'm waiting for the result.
So,
I was just wondering, what is
without having the whole history, it's difficult to answer that. I'm not gonna ask that question in front of everybody. But if a kidney lasted for 20 years, that's amazing. Most kidneys for a deceased donor, you expect to last 5 to 10 years. For a living donor, you hope you get 10 to 20 years out of it. So if she went 20 years with the kidney, there's something that we call chronic rejection, which is where just over time, and it's kind of paradoxical, the medication that we're giving to prevent rejection can actually cause kidney failure over several years. So if she was on the medication for 20 years, most likely that contributed to the problem with the kidney. So what does that mean for her? Likelihood, again, without knowing her history, likelihood is that any other kidney would do just as well. That's the hope.
And what are the chances of the second surgery for her? Is there more chance of infection, less chance of her body accepting microbiome?
I can't answer that without knowing her and more information, but in general, it's no different.
When I was going through my interviews at North Shore, they told me that I actually had one patient that had 5 kidney transplants. They don't take the old ones out, they just plug in a new one. So multiple transplants is possible. At least that's what I was told.
Yeah, that's.
Yes, so just to touch on it a little, if I have a couple of seconds, there's only a couple of reasons that we take out your native kidneys. One is if you have what's called polycystic kidney disease, where they're very big, a lot of cysts, and they're bleeding, or you keep getting infection. Those are the 2 reasons, or if you're worried about a cancer. So bleeding, infection, cancer are the reasons to take out the old kidneys. Otherwise, we don't even see them, we don't go near them. We put the kidney in the groin. First, you put it on the right side. If you need a second transplant, you put it on the left side. If you need a third transplant, we take out those kidneys first, the transplanted kidneys, and put it in the same place. So right now, I don't know what the record is, but the most I've seen is 5. Yes?
I had a cousin who had a heart transplant. He since passed away about 4 years ago. But what they found with that heart that he originally got lasted about 8 years, and they found a genetic defect. They didn't detect it when they first got the heart. Is that something they've improved upon, generally speaking?
In the transplanted heart, they found the defect.
After 8 years was gone by, they discovered there was a defect in the heart, a genetic defect. They weren't able to detect it then. He got sick again, went through the process, that's when they discovered he had a genetic defect. At that point, he tried getting him onto the list again. It was difficult, because certain organs started to shut down. They got him on the list, sometimes they another part, but it didn't take. But the question being is, in regard to the genetic defect of the heart, because they didn't find it then, or the initial, with that first part in, have they improved that process of knowing that they've got a good organ that they're putting into the person?
So unfortunately, and this is what I was touching on before, transplant's not a perfect science. And the biggest limitation we have is getting information from family members that may not know the person. So a lot of times you have someone that dies and the family's donating and they're very much involved, whether it's a sibling or a spouse or a parent or children, and they know the history. A lot of times you get somebody where it could be, I had a case actually last night, I got a phone call about a donor where 28-year-old donor, and the mother didn't know any information about him because she hadn't seen him in 5 years. So she couldn't answer questions about drug use, she couldn't answer questions about personal things and medication. No one knows. So from a genetic standpoint, if you don't, depending on who was there when they were asking the questions, and you have a short time to do this, so it's not like you have weeks to get the information, you have hours to days to get this information. So if they have a family member that comes forward but doesn't know the history, that's where you have to go on. So you are taking a chance. It's one of the limitations of transplant, of deceased donor transplant. Yes, sir.
How successful is pancreas?
So how successful is pancreas transplant? Pancreas transplant is not very common in New York. There's about 10 to 12 done in New York State a year. Minnesota and Michigan, I believe, do the most in the country. The reason is that it's very specific diabetics that would qualify for a pancreas transplant. It's It's not just anyone who's diabetic. Most of the diabetics we have here are type 2, but you need to be type 1 for the pancreas transplant or have other things going on with you. Success rates vary, but usually they're not as good, nowhere near as good as kidney or liver. You're looking at maybe, I think the latest number is about 50-60% success rate over 5 years. Yes, sir.
In case of lung transplant, has there been any cases where the recipient lived longer than 5 or maybe even 10 years?
Yes, definitely. Again, it depends. So there are different things, different factors involved. Most importantly, and I'll keep saying it, is the reason for the transplant in the first place and how sick you are going into the transplant. All the numbers that you see are averages. So you always have people that unfortunately don't live and people that live longer than the average. Yes.
Excuse me, in 2009 I was diagnosed with a very rare blood disorder called amyloidosis. And that disorder causes your organs to gradually decline and not to function. And it could be any organ, it could be your heart, but for most people, in this very small group of people who have this disease, for most of those people, it attacks the kidneys first. And so I knew in 2009 at some point my kidneys were going to go. In 2015, my kidneys did shut down totally. I went on dialysis for 9 months. My sister was kind enough to donate a kidney to me. My sister and my wife both matched, actually. And after I had the operation, I was told that I had 5 family members who had stepped up, but only my sister and wife were tested. And so that was 2.5 years ago. And I've been on that transplant, thank God. It's going very, very well. The first thing I want to say is, having been on dialysis for 9 months, dialysis is not the end of your life. I mean, certainly you can maintain, a semblance of a reasonable life on dialysis, but coming off dialysis is like getting your life back. And for anybody who does that, who donates in that fashion, I don't know if you can truly appreciate what you're doing for the donee because of the life that they're able to lead, not having to go to dialysis anymore. There was one point I wanted to make and one question I wanted to ask. The point I wanted to make is, and I probably mentioned it, but it needs to be mentioned again, everybody's kidney doesn't match. I mean, you could bring in 7 relatives and you may not get a match, but they can donate their kidney into what's called a kidney network, which means you're putting in a live kidney and you'll get a live kidney back probably within 6 months, from what I've been told. I can't overemphasize how important that is to do that, because, not matching is not unusual. I was lucky, my wife and my sister matched. But putting a kidney into that program will get you a kidney, and as the doctor pointed out, the success rates with live kidneys is so much better than with cadaver kidneys that you really, if you can get a live kidney, that's definitely the way to go.
Was your sister a perfect match?
Excuse me?
Was your sister a perfect match?
I don't think there is such thing as a perfect match, and the doctor will tell you better later, but the match requirements have been going down because the drugs have been getting better, so the match doesn't have to be as good as it used to be. So it's just a question of how many, they evaluate matches based on the criteria that get hit, and that's all I'm going to say because I'm not a doctor. But I wanted to ask an ethical question. When you get a transplant, you get very close with your transplant surgeon, and usually there's a new nephrologist that you see who's part of the team, and you get very, very close with them. I had mine done in New York City, and I got obviously very close with the nephrologist, and we were talking about medicine, and I have my career was in medicine, not as a doctor though. And he said to me, he said, you know that Medicare pays for everybody on dialysis. I don't know how many people know that. The government pays for everybody on dialysis. Doesn't matter how old you are, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, because nobody could afford it otherwise. But the government pays for this. And in this country, you're not allowed to trade in body parts for money. It's against the law. Rabbi will probably tell you it's against our religion, but it's definitely against the law. And the nephrologist You know Dr. David Soror?
Yes.
Yeah.
I went on vacation with him recently.
So-
I'm a good friend. I used to work with his wife, Anna.
Super guy. He said to me, why doesn't the government pay people to donate their kidneys? Think about it. By the government doing this, they're gonna save money. Because it's cheaper to pay somebody for a kidney and take the other person off dialysis than to keep them on dialysis for the rest of their lives. And some people are on dialysis 10, 20 years. It's not, 1, 2, 3 years, it's 10 or 20 years.
So they've looked at this, and there's a lot of data about what dialysis costs. I don't remember the numbers offhand, but I think it's about $140,000 a year.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And what is a surgery cost?
Transplant, and after the first 2 years, then it's beneficial. The first year it's expensive, but after
So
that,
the question I had for the doctor and for the rabbi, what do you think about that? A government supervised program where the government would pay people to donate their kidneys.
so there are certain, if you don't mind, I'll answer this first. There are certain countries. There are certain countries that it is legal to pay for kidneys. Philippines, I believe Iran.
Well, Iran does it because they can't afford the dialysis center.
Right, but there is monetary reward for donation. Places like China, they don't do it anymore, but they used to take donors, organs from prisoners who had no choice. Now they had a lot of issues with that, so they're not allowed to do that. They changed their practice. Personally, I think you should be allowed to pay for it, but unfortunately it's illegal in the United States, and that's what we have to go by right now. Part of the reason is you're putting people at an unfair advantage. And if you think back to how many years ago was it that Mickey Mantle jumped to the front of he didn't pay for it, but just from his popularity, when he had liver failure, he jumped to the top of the transplant list. And that started a whole process to regulate the transplant waiting list and how people move up on the list and who gets preference. The system that we have right now, it's different for every organ. For kidney, it's based on a couple of things. Number one is based on how long you've been waiting. So someone that's waiting 8 years typically will get a transplant a lot faster than somebody that is waiting 1 year. It's based on how long you've been on dialysis. If someone had someone that was on dialysis for 7 or 8 years and was not listed for transplant, as soon as they get listed, it counts like they were waiting for 7 years. They get all that time back. So they'll jump to the head of the list because of that, because they're on dialysis longer. And then the last thing that they look at, among other factors, but the less important thing that they look at, is everyone's blood gets tested. And you look at the likelihood that you have what's called antibodies, things that will attack the organ. Someone that's had a prior transplant, women that have had babies, or someone that receives a blood transfusion. Those are 3 reasons that you're going to have more antibodies because you were exposed to something else already. So if it's more likely that you're going to reject an organ, and you happen to have an organ that is a good match, you're going to get moved to the top of the list because you're not going to find something like that again. So it doesn't have to be a perfect match. You were asking that perfect match before. His answer was dead on. With the medication today, you don't need perfection, but you need something that's going to be close. And it's giving you a probability of how likely your body is going to reject it.
What is the amount of prednisone the recipient's going to be on after the second?
It varies per person. There are some centers that don't give prednisone. Prednisone is a steroid. It's a great anti-rejection agent. We use it to treat acute rejection, but it has a lot of side effects, and a lot of patients don't like it. So some people, some centers don't do it unless you're high risk for rejection. So again, I can't answer that.
Doctor,
That center
I'd like to hear the rabbi's opinion on that.
Sure, yeah,
Paying for a donation.
Right.
I think it's certainly worth consideration. I'll tell you one thing that comes to my mind that would potentially be a challenge, and that is that it incentivizes people to a point where it might not be entirely volitional. So somebody who is really economically disadvantaged would feel a certain pressure to donate, and society might decide that that's not a problem, that in terms of weighing, various considerations, that that's not a problem. I mean, obviously, we do that with fertility technology. So, people will harvest and sell eggs, for example, but it's not, there isn't quite the same life risk that's involved. So that would be my only question about that.
I just would comment on that, and I knew you were gonna say that anyhow, but
Have I become that predictable, Howard?
if you can separate out for a moment the donors from the donees, where the donors are, let's say, I'm making up a number, we get $25,000, all right? But if this was controlled by the government, the donees would be listed based on the criteria the doctor gets. So that you would have people from all different levels of society, lower levels and higher levels, taking advantage of a program that could influence lower level, society level people to donate more often because of the money factor. It's true, but the benefit would be evenly spread throughout the population.
I think it's a good consideration. I'm just sharing with you what probably is behind the reluctance might be too strong a word, but the considerations of the government, that it could get to a point where you might commodify.
Also, one more point, just to add that I didn't touch on before, but it's important that everyone here knows. When you're going through the process, if somebody is interested in donating or to see if they're a candidate for donation, if you know someone that needs an organ, their insurance company will pay for the entire workup, okay, 100%. So the insurance company of the recipient covers the process. They cover the transplant, they cover the donor surgery, they cover the donor workup, and the initial recovery afterwards. It's not on your insurance.
Well, in my case, I was on Medicare at the time I had it. My sister was under 65. Medicare paid for everything, for both of us.
Right.
Paid for everything.
Yeah, they pay for exactly. They pay for the donor.
Yes, sir.
The High Bank of New York charges $1,000 for the cornea from the recipient receives, and they charge the insurance company of the recipient. And then I just want to say that most of the corneas will be used. Even those corneas that are not perfect for grafting, they use part of it for patching the graft of the cornea.
I thank you. I don't have any experience with corneal transplant, so that's good to know.
We have a few more minutes, but before that, I just want to remind everyone, there are forms up front in case you wanted to sign up with the Halakhic Organ Donation Society, and also Dr. Rennick brought passes from North Shore, from Northwell Health, that has information about organ donation also. And also help yourself with refreshments in the back.
Without sounding like, I'm sorry? Without sounding like an advocate for one or the other, Halakhic Organ Donation Society holds is a non-profit organization whose purpose is primarily just to get the word out about organ donation in the Jewish community. Initially, they started with Jewish physicians, and they went to rabbis, and now they're basically trying to do outreach just to let people know from their standpoint, or from certain people's standpoint, what's halakhically allowed. It's controversial. It's a very controversial area. People are on both ends of the spectrum there. But what they try to do is, if you are interested, they will try to hook you up with the appropriate people to get you answers and to get you help. There are other organizations out there that work more directly with matching, where if you're interested in getting a match, whether you do it through the individual center or if you find a nonpartisan group, they will match you up with the center to find an appropriate match. Yes, ma'am?
What's the best way to make your wishes known if, God forbid, you're in an accident?
So,
make sure that they know that you give your consent.
So that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that. I'm going to answer it, and then there's a caveat. So the best thing is, on your driver's license, you can basically put what you want to do. That's the first thing they're going to look at. If, God forbid, there is an accident, they look in your wallet and they get information. They have ID bracelets or necklaces where you could say, I'm an organ donor for whatever it is. And you can specify, I would like to donate my liver, but not my intestine or pancreas. You can say anything that you want and they'll respect it. Here's the issue. It means nothing if you have a family member that will not sign the consent. Ultimately, what it comes down to, because if a person, and I get in trouble for how I say this, so I'll use myself. If I get into a car accident and I die, I can't say you anymore. If I get into an accident and die, and my mother or my wife doesn't sign the consent, they will not take my organs. You could have video testimonial with me saying, I want to donate all my organs. I could have signed the paper right before I died saying, I want to donate my organ. Once you're dead, you have no rights from a legal standpoint. So there has to be a family member that's willing to sign the consent.
So communication.
Exactly. So your family has to know your wishes.
I have a question. Beyond all of the world of modern medicine, are we heading towards or doing research in artificial kidneys such
Yes.
as hearts and other organs?
100%.
Are we going to get there? Is this a possibility?
So I used to have a teacher that always said, the kidney is smarter than any person, and all the nephrologists and all the surgeons that think they know something, the kidney will prove them wrong. The kidney is one of the most difficult organs to mimic because its function is very difficult to replicate. It's simply a filter, but it's not that easy to do. So heart is the easiest because it's just a pump. So they have artificial hearts now. It's called an LVAD that bridges you to transplant. They're working on 3D models and what's the term? Stem cells to try to generate heart and lungs. How far away are we? Probably 15, 20 years. That's from what I've seen over the past few years.
And that would be made out of stem cells?
That's one way to do it. For the kidney, it would have to be stem cells. For the heart, it could be anything. Because the heart is just a pump.
So how far are we for kidneys? Anything in the horizon?
Nothing immediate.
But they're doing research.
They're doing a lot of research on it, but there's nothing up and coming. Heart, I think, is the biggest. Lung, they're working on too. Nothing really for kidney. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody in attendance and their participation, especially the panelists from Temple Israel hosting us, Dr. Stecker, Dr. Winnick, Dr. Moskowitz, and Rebecca Klar. And of course, the person who brought all this together, Mr. Sean Sharuch Eshagov. And hopefully we wish that he gets a kidney very soon. And this was not bad. Thank you everybody for coming. There's refreshments in the back. And we'd like to request a group picture for the panelists before we go.